Hi, my name is Olajide Olagunju, and this is lecture 2 in the lecture series titled How to Resolve a Conflict, that is based on my book that is on your screen, titled How to Resolve a Conflict. The first lecture ended, I was trying to spell out the full meaning of UNCITRAL. UNCITRAL is the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, and the model rules at the end of my book is adapted from the UNCITRAL rules on conciliation. Now let's move on to the lecture for today, and that is titled How to Resolve a Conflict, lecture 2. And we'll be looking at chapter 1 of How to Resolve a Conflict. And the title of chapter 1 is What is Wrong with Conflict? What is wrong with conflict? It begins with a quote which says, relationships free of conflict don't exist. I repeat, relationships free of conflict don't exist. That's from a Yoruba adage. And its power, the power of that adage is in the fact that it's saying, essentially and effectively, that what drives relationships, what makes relationships to be formed and to exist are conflicts. No conflict, no relationship. On the other hand, what makes conflict and what makes conflicts to exist are relationships. No relationships, no conflict. And I think it's something we need to reflect upon very deeply when we look at conflict, especially when we are tempted to see conflict as negative. That the essence of relationships is conflict. It's the driver of relationships. And the driver of conflict is relationship. We'll go to that in more details in chapter 10. But let's look at what we have here in the main body of chapter 1. I'll read and then we'll discuss. Conflict has a bad name only due to negative conflict management. Conflict has a bad name only due to negative conflict management. Whatever the degree of change that engenders them or that they engender, conflicts are not in themselves bad. On the contrary, they can be instruments of progress in human relationships. And AFA Akran explains that in this book, which I cited in the first lecture, in lecture 1, titled A Sudden Outbreak of Common Sense. This is what he says. Conflicts are not only inevitable, they are also positive and sometimes desirous to effect necessary change, to generate new ideas, to test existing and novel ideas, and the boundaries between the possible and the impossible, to reveal and exorcise fears, to test group cohesion, to build teams, to reveal different needs and interests among individuals and among groups, to explore personalities, to learn about each other, to enable people to express strong feelings, to discover the way other people think, to reveal or discuss fears about each other and about personal failure, to create mutual dependence, So those are the reasons, or some of the reasons why conflict is good. Conflict is not necessarily bad. May you look at some of them. Conflict is good because it helps to effect necessary change. Sometimes, if there's no conflict, things continue as usual, seemingly normal, but somebody is being hurt. And so there's a need for change. And if conflict does not unearth that need for change, the parties or one of them continues to suffer. That's not ideal. That's not ideal. Again, conflict is good, positive, because it generates new ideas. It helps us to put on our thinking cap. We think more. Conflict forces us to think more. And as we think more, new ideas are generated. New ideas that are salutary, good, necessary, useful for our relationships. Again, conflict is positive and sometimes desirable to test existing and novel ideas, as well as the boundaries between the possible and impossible. So it does not only help us to generate new ideas, it also helps us to think through those ideas or old ideas. Maybe they don't work again. Maybe they are no longer good for us. Maybe we should start applying them. Maybe we should start using them. And the fact that it also helps us to, conflict helps us to know what's working, what's not working, what's possible, what's impossible, what we should not be doing, what we should be doing, what we should not be doing. Again, conflict is positive and sometimes desirable to reveal and exercise fears. So conflict brings out the fears, exposes the fears. Now, if they are not exposed, if the fears are not exposed, how do we exercise them? How do we address them? How do we deal with them? And fear, as a rule, is negative. And so they need to be addressed and be dealt with. Conflict brings them out. Conflict exposes our fears and helps us to exercise them, to let them go, so that we can have a better life. We can move on with our life. Conflict is also positive and sometimes desirable to test group cohesion. How strong is our union? As a nation, as individuals, individual couples, businesses, partnerships. How strong is our union? Conflict helps us to test that. And that is good because it makes us end up stronger. That is, at least there's the possibility, especially when we apply the skills that we are learning in this lecture series. Conflict is also positive and sometimes desirable to build teams, to build strong teams, useful teams, beneficial teams. So the conflict has helped us to look at what we need to put in our teams that will make it beneficial to our goals and purposes. So that instead of our teams dragging us back, they will really push us forward, make us, help us do better, improve on our relationships and on our lives. Conflict is also positive and sometimes desirable to reveal different needs and interests among individuals and among groups. Now, this for me is very, very critical and pivotal. Because I argue in chapter 10 that the core of conflict is unmet needs. When we get to chapter 10, I'll explain that in more detail. Conflict is also positive and sometimes desirable to explore personalities. Who are we dealing with? Who are we ourselves? Why are we incompatible? What can we do with our personalities to make us align more with our relationships, which, as I said, is why we have conflict. I strongly believe that there's nobody who cannot improve. And so the fact that we have different personalities does not mean that we cannot tone them up or tune them up. We can improve our personalities. We can have different personalities and still be in the same relationship or workspace or business or partnerships. Conflict helps us to look at those and deal with them and address them and resolve the challenges that our personalities may be creating and therefore impeding our relationships and its ability to achieve our goals, both as a group and as individuals. So conflict is also positive and sometimes desirable to learn about each other. Yeah. So we probably think we know each other and we don't. With conflict, we begin to look at each other more closely, trying to understand each other, trying to learn about each other. And that would take us forward. That's positive. That's a positive aspect of conflict. Conflict is also positive and sometimes desirable to enable people to express strong feelings. In the 10 steps, I teach that the first thing a good mediator looks for in resolving a conflict is feelings. And we should be more sensitive, especially when the personality, the party we're dealing with is on the quiet side. Because the fact that they are quiet does not mean that they don't have emotions, that they don't have feelings, or that the conflict has not generated some strong feelings in them. It's just that some people are more expressive of their feelings than others. So conflict help us to express our strong feelings. Conflict is also positive and sometimes desirable to discover the way other people think. Again, no assumption. Conflict helps us to end our assumptions. So we may think we know how they think, maybe we don't. We don't know their thinking pattern. When the conflict arises, we're able to discover, to understand better how our partners, our business relationships, or the other side of our business relationship, how they think. Conflict also is positive and sometimes desirable to reveal or discuss fears about each other and about personal failure. I argue in a work titled Negotiation that citing one or two authors that perception is key. Perception is key. We relate with people based on our perception of them. And so conflict is one thing that helps us to understand and discuss fears, the fears we have about each other. If you like, concerns we have about each other. And also about our personal failure. Failures are not ends in themselves. They're just building blocks. At least they could be building blocks. And so our conflict helps us to look at what is of concern to us, what is a challenge to us, and that's important because we have a conflict because we're in a relationship, and we need to be able to know what the concern of the other person is, and where the other person is struggling. Finally, conflict is positive and sometimes desirable to create mutual dependence. I mean, a tree does not make a forest. That speaks to each of us. We need other people, and conflict helps us to positively create that mutual dependence. It's not negative, it's positive. I think we'll stop here for today, and in lecture 3, we'll move on with what is wrong with conflict. Thank you. Please make your post, your critiques, so that we can improve as we go on this lecture series titled How to Resolve a Conflict. Thank you so much.